General Director and CEO of Austin Opera. Thank you for joining us for this special Chez presentation for the launch of Opera ATX, our new series at Austin Opera, with David T. Little's Soldier Songs. So this evening I'm going to moderate a conversation with two amazing individuals. We'll also have some musical clips to play for you, but I will begin by introducing the folks next to me. This is David T. Little. And according to the New Yorker, David T. Little is one of the most imaginative young composers on the scene. And according to the New York Times, he has a knack for overturning musical conventions. His operas Dog Days, JFK, Finkensport, and Soldier Songs have been widely acclaimed, again according to the New York Times, proving beyond any doubt that opera has both a relevant present and a bright future. We can clap for that, yeah. So David has been commissioned by the world's most prestigious institutions and performers, including the Metropolitan Opera. That hasn't come out yet, so stay tuned. That's a work in progress. The Kennedy Center, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, the New World Symphony, the International Contemporary Ensemble, The Crossing, Eighth Blackbird, the Cronus Quartet, and Beth Morrison projects. From 2014 to 2017, David was composer in residence at Opera Philadelphia. That's where we met. He previously served as the executive director of the Mata Festival, and he is currently the chair of the composition department at Mannes, the New School. He's the founding artistic director of the ensemble Newspeak. That's who you will hear playing Friday and Saturday night. David's music can be heard on New Amsterdam, Innova, and National Sawdust Tracks labels, and I would get in a lot of trouble if I didn't mention that he is published by Boozy and Hawks. Next to David is Beth Morrison, and since 2006, Beth Morrison Projects has been an industry disruptor and tastemaker at the forefront of musical and theatrical innovation by commissioning, developing, producing, and touring groundbreaking new works of living composers and their collaborators, which take the form of opera theater, music theater, and vocal theater. Beth Morrison Projects encourages risk-taking, and the result is provocative works that represent a dynamic and lasting legacy for a new American canon. So Beth Morrison Projects is based in New York, but in 2014, they expanded to Los Angeles through partnerships with LA Opera, the LA Philharmonic, 4 theaters, and the Center Theater Group. In fact, this production of Soldier Songs that you will see this weekend actually opened LA Opera's season to rave reviews. Beth Morrison Projects, during the last 5 years, alone, has produced works in 43 venues in 22 cities around the world. Their commitment to cutting-edge musical expression has created, according to Opera News, its own genre of originality. In 2013, Beth Morrison Projects paired up with the Here Arts Center to found the Prototype Festival. This is an annual festival that showcases contemporary opera theater and music theater projects over 10 days each January. For those of us who work in the opera field who are interested in new opera, we have been making a pilgrimage to New York every January since the founding of this festival. The New Yorker called the festival essential to the evolution of American opera. The New York Times called it bracingly innovative, a point of reference. And I'm not done with you, Beth, because this Friday, WQXR named Beth Morrison one of 5 women powerhouses you can find crushing it behind the scenes in the classical music world. The article states, this is a quote, "Every project that Morrison executes is achingly real and utterly necessary." I mean, put that on your tombstone. That's like, that's it. You've done it. You've done it.
I'm ready to die right now.
And closes with, Morrison is a no-frills, boots and leather-wearing champion of new works, unlike any other. We're so excited to have Beth Morrison and David T. Little here in town. We're going to talk to you about Soldier Songs, and we're going to start with where this piece originated. David, in your mind, how did this come to be?
Well, it was a while ago. About 15 years ago, I was visiting my high school in New Jersey, and I was there for a sort of career day to talk to the current students about being a composer. And sharing the stage with me that day was a friend of mine, this guy Justin Bennett, who I'd gone to school with, who had just gotten back from Iraq, where he was a field medic. And this is someone I grew up with, someone I knew very well, our families were very close. And the differences at that point in our experiences were so staggering. And I sort of wanted to understand that in a way. I had always had, as a high school student, very sort of absolute ideas about war and about the military by extension. And I started to realize in talking with Justin that I needed to reevaluate those. And then zooming back, I realized that my family, really my generation of my family, were the first to not have anyone serving. And this goes back, I learned later, to my third great-grandfather, who was in the Union Army during the Civil War and died in Memphis, you know. So I come from this long line of military service. So in a way, this thing that I was sort of ignorantly critical of and kind of dismissed was actually this thing that I had come from. And I needed to understand that. So I reached out and I asked if all of these people who I knew, Justin and friends of mine from school, those who were not deployed at the moment, and my family members, and asked if they would just sit down and talk with me about their experience. And Soldier Song sort of grew out of that process.
Right, so all the text you will hear on Friday and Saturday night, it was all written by David based on his interviews with friends and family who had served. And these are veterans of 5 different wars. That's where the text you'll hear on Friday and Saturday night is. So you were commissioned to make this into a song cycle originally, correct?
Yes, so the Pittsburgh Music Ensemble had, at the time, a sort of every other year competition called the Harvey Gall Prize, and I had entered it and won, and which was lovely. And I remember having a meeting with Kevin No, the artistic director, and you know, a commission like that is normally for a 20-minute piece to be part of a concert. And I said, you know, Kevin, I think you should let me write the whole concert. Thinking he would say, no, that's a nice idea, but you do your 20 minutes and then we're going to do Schoenberg or whatever. And he said, well, do you think you could do that? I said, yes. You know, not really thinking you would even get that far. And then suddenly I had this opportunity to compose an evening-length work for baritone and, at the time, 6 instruments. And that became Soldier Songs.
So had Newspeak come into existence by this point?
Newspeak had come into existence in a way, but the project was not part of the original project. So Newspeak was a group that I originally founded in Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was a grad student. It was originally a free jazz trio. Did you know this? Bass, clarinet, violin, and I played drums. And then when I started my doctorate at Princeton, I reformed the group as the group it is now, an amplified octet. And it wasn't until Beth and I started working together that Newspeak became the band for Soldier Songs.
So the piece premiered in Pittsburgh. People loved it, and then somehow this force of nature got involved. So how did that happen?
Well, so at the time I was involved in a composers collective with 2 dear friends, Jed Greenstein and Missy Mazzoli. And we had this grand plan that we were going to co-write an opera together.
That's a terrible idea.
It's a terrible idea.
Because I always tell this story. I've never heard
you've never?
I'm really excited.
I hope I get it right. I might have to correct me if I get it. So we had a meeting, I guess Missy knew you from Yale. And so Missy was like, oh, I know this great producer. She'll produce our show. And I was like, oh, cool, let's meet with her. And this meeting was amazing because we were like really excited about this idea that we had. And Beth was like, cool, that's a cool idea. So you should write the piece and then talk to me about it when it actually exists. Because it was just an idea at that point. The piece ended up never happening. The Composers Collective, I mean, we're still very dear friends, but that as an organization lasted maybe another 2 years. But I guess maybe the next day, I said, you know, it was great to meet with you. I just wanted to let you know I have this piece that just premiered. I'd love to send it to you. And I sent it to you, and things took off from there.
And so Beth, what did you think when you saw it?
So he sent me an audio recording of it, and I put it on and I listened to it through its entirety, and I was crying at the end, and I called David and was like, okay, let me just preface this by saying this was my first year of producing, or my second year of producing, so at that time, my company was just me. I had just moved to New York. I was living in a tiny little studio apartment on the Upper East Side, where I was also working from that. And I had no money, and I didn't come from money, and I didn't know anybody. So that's how things started. It was a good start. But I called David and I said, you know, I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know with what money, I don't know anything, but like we got to do this. And that was sort of the beginning, and we started working on it, and in 2008 had a first workshop. We had been looking for a director, and we came together with a guy named Yuval Sharon, who's now gone on to be quite a famous director as well. And we did our first production, which was a very different production than the one that you'll see tonight. We built 5 years ago now, with film by Beth Morrison and by director Ashley Tata. And this is a piece that we tore. It's been such a gift and such a joy to be able to keep revisiting this piece over and over again. And all of the different cities that we've been able to take it, and to see how this piece connects so deeply with the veteran community, with families of veterans, with people who've, most people have in some way been touched by the military and by war. And so this piece really does hit home in a lot of ways, and it's something that when we started the project together, to build the production, we kind of realized when we did the first workshop, we looked at each other like, oh, I think we missed the audience. Like we thought we were making this production for new music fans and audience members. And actually we realized we missed a whole big audience, which was the veteran community.
So to just close the loop in how this opera has now come to Austin, Texas, after I'd been here a few months, the idea for Opera ATX was born, devised by me and my senior team, and it was really what we believed our response to the opportunity to extend the company's programming footprint beyond the Long Center, and to offer some different operatic experiences to Austin. Most of my senior team had experience at other opera companies in producing in additional venues as a means to attract new audiences, and as a means to really satiate the desire of our most enthusiastic opera patrons. And so the idea for Opera ATX was born. And once we had the idea, we were so excited about it that we wanted to get the product out into the marketplace right away and see what would happen and who would come and what people would think about it. But the typical planning horizon for opera is 3 to 5 years, and we were not interested in waiting 3 to 5 years to realize this idea of Opera ATX. And so in talking with Nathan DuPoint, our Director of Artistic Operations, we're both huge fans of David T. Little. I knew David, of course, from Opera Philadelphia, and Nathan actually commissioned David's largest work to date, JFK, which premiered at Fort Worth Opera. That's where Nate used to work. So we already had a mutual love of David T. Little. We knew and greatly admired Beth Morrison, and when we realized there was a touring production of a David T. Little opera, we thought, oh my goodness, let's do it. Let's sign on, let's make it happen. We kind of envisioned the ideal venue at first of being the Stateside Theater. That wasn't available, and so we're in the big old Paramount, which is an exciting place to be. It was really exciting picking out our marquee and putting your names on the marquee. It's really great. So that's how this production came here in Austin. And this will be the first Opera ATX production. Moving forward, we are really looking at productions that are more intimate than what we can do in the Long Center, that are immersive in some way. And curatorially, I would say we're very interested in pieces that have something to say, or pieces that really make you think about what you might have to say and feel. And so Soto Songs is a great launch for that. So I think we can now go into the piece itself.
Yeah, I just want to say before we talk about the piece, it's just like such an honor to be here with all of you. I've never been to Austin before. We did one of David's works in Fort Worth, and I bought these cowboy boots. So I thought I'd bring them out for you all tonight.
Okay, so Soldier Songs is divided into 3 parts, although they seamlessly run together. 75-minute piece that runs straight through, all based on David's interviews with his friends and family who had served. And so the first of these 3 parts is titled Child. And I'll read the quick synopsis here. A boy first encounters war through toys and games, playing with action figures available with an arsenal of accessories. As he grows, video games replace these dolls. These games offer an immersive, combat-like experience in which the player kills countless enemies, and where the only consequence of the player's death is a brief wait while the game reloads. As the boy becomes a young adult, the game becomes more real. He registers for the draft at age 18. Reflecting on the highly randomized selective service process from the Vietnam War, he counts each day with a passing dread at the thought of combat. Once deployed, he counts the days again, but differently, down from 365, hoping he makes it to 1. And so I think we're going to play an excerpt from the very first piece, right? Real American Heroes, Nate. And so tell us this is how the show opens. Well, it's the second piece in the show.
Right, the second, there's a sort of prologue, I guess you could say, with some of the interviews, and then first time we meet our character is Real American Heroes. And, you know, a lot of this first part is based on my own experience as a kid. And, you know, playing with G.I. Joe and playing with Star Wars and thinking about, you know, having this sort of, as you said, consequence-free expression of violence in a certain way. And, yeah, and then turning 18 and signing up for the, you know, getting my draft registration and counting till, I guess it's, forget the age now because I'm so far past it, but it was an age and I was like, I can't wait till I'm this age, and then I don't have to worry about it, you know. Get it through 26, I think, yeah. And so, another thing I should mention about this piece actually is the sort of sound world of it, which is quite eclectic. This piece was written at a time for me where I was grappling with some things as a composer. I have a very, very diverse set of musical interests. I grew up singing musical theater on stage, you know, in all my high school productions and some productions in college. And so I know the musical theater repertoire really well, but then I got sort of obsessed with classical music, new music, modernism. I love death metal, black metal, all the metals. There are a lot of different kinds of metal. I like all of them, except fantasy metal. I don't like wizards so much, so that's a problem. But I digress. And so this sound world is very, like, each movement is kind of a different universe. And as you listen to the piece, it's not so much that you get a straight shot narrative, but that you are given these sort of impressions that accumulate over the course of the piece. So when you're listening to the whole work this weekend, you know, don't think so much of you know, that this is one character moving through. Think of it as, well, here's a photograph, here's a photograph, here's a photograph, and what is the accumulation of those. So, Real American Heroes is very much inspired by musical theater.
Just like my toy soldier, killing all the bad killing bad guys by leaving. Guys, get to choose who will die. Guys, bad guys, get to choose who will die. Good guys, bad guys, get to choose who will die. Good guys, bad guys, get to choose who will die. Who will die? Who will die? Get to choose who will die. Get to choose who will die. Get to choose who will die. Get to choose.
So.
I guess musical theater and metal, actually.
And so this recording is of the same performers you're going to hear this weekend. David Adam Moore is the star of this one-man show. He was Lieutenant Audebert in Silent Night that was just here. That's the French lieutenant. He was also the title role in The Manchurian Candidate, if you've seen that. He's done this role many, many times. That's definitely, again, what sealed the deal for us here at Austin Opera, to find out that you guys were available and David Adam Moore was available to do it. We signed on the dotted line. And so here he's using some falsetto to be a kid, right?
Yes, yes. The great thing about baritones is they can sing in this really high falsetto. And so I thought, let's just use that right out of the gates. It's actually quite a difficult piece because in part of the range. Not so much the falsetto part, but the beginning begins very, very low at the bottom, and for some baritones beyond the bottom of their range, and then the next thing they sing is that very high falsetto entrance, and the whole piece sort of jumps around. It's quite, David has said that it's basically like singing a full recital.
Right,
in terms of,
with no break.
With no break.
No intermission or water break for him. What I think is so amazing is in this, the first piece that David appears, you make use of falsetto for him to demonstrate his youth. But as we get toward the end of the opera, one of the most stunning arias is Two Marines, where this is a man who sees two Marines coming to the door to inform him that his son has died in combat. And at the end of that aria, he goes into falsetto again to just portray the unbelievable aching grief of that moment, I think, which is incredible. So part one starts with a little kid talking about his toy soldiers, and it concludes with counting the days, right, when he's of the draft age. So part two is The Warrior. And we're going to play an excerpt from Still Life. But let's talk about part two of it. Because the first piece there, right, is where the soldier arrives in combat.
Which one is it? Still Life, right,
Yeah,
yes.
which we're going to play,
Yes.
yeah. This is metal, there's metal.
Yeah, this is definitely metal. And this is, this is about the use of music in combat and the use of music by soldiers to, in this case, really to sort of get ready to go out on patrol, to get ready to sort of do what they have to do. Music is often used to sort of come down after coming back in from patrol. I talked a lot with my friends about, what music this was for them, and it was interesting. It varied person to person, but metal is definitely a sort of common theme of, let's get ready to do this. Is a song, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor is a song. Raining Blood is another. So there are a lot of, we don't need to get into that, but it's an intense thing.
So part two of the opera is called The Warrior, and the synopsis is the boy is now a modern-day soldier, as David just told you. As technology has changed the tools and language of war, it has also changed the experience of combat. The soldier creates his own soundtrack, piping heavy metal into earbuds. He recreates the feeling of the video game from the last section, shooting abstract enemies that appear as pixels on a screen. But the game becomes too real, and the brutality of war sets in. Images of death, destruction, and killing that may have been exciting in action movies back home now play out with horror before his eyes. He seeks refuge from incoming ordnance, an unbearable experience that he knows will stay with him for the rest of his life. So the first piece in this section is called Still Life with Tank and iPod. And this is a soldier who has just arrived. You'll hear him say the words, 24 hours ago I was in New Jersey. So we'll hear an excerpt from that.
Bring my iPod. entertained. When I enter combat in my Abrams tank, I listen to Metallica to keep me in a
David this morning, and I said, you know, the first time I heard his music was just in a workshop setting in Philadelphia, and I felt as if someone had punched me in the gut. And I said, you wouldn't believe it to meet him. He's the most well-adjusted, like, wonderful.
Well, you know, that's very kind of you.
So there are multiple times in this opera where you use actual recordings of your friends speaking about their experience. One thing that you've commented on a lot when you've written about this piece is that a common refrain as you conducted these interviews is that people kept telling you, I've never really told this to anyone before. So these experiences are not something that were widely shared, and you talked about why you also felt this was a real impetus to create the piece. It was giving voice to these experiences that hadn't been shared. And so we do want to share with you a quick excerpt of a piece from this part in the opera called Steel Rain, in which we hear one of these men talk about his experience. You also wanted to make sure that we mentioned, if there are any veterans here with us, this is the part of the opera that sometimes can trigger some memories of battle. So we just want to be clear about that. And so we'll hear an excerpt from Steel Rain. So now might also be a good time to talk about this piece from a production standpoint. So there are 7 instruments in the ensemble, but those are not the only things creating sound in this opera.
Yeah, why don't you talk about the sound and then I'll talk about the video.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the things I was very interested in this work, and partially because of what it's about, you know, you're writing a piece about the impact of combat, it's hard for it to be a quiet piece, I think. And so early on, right from the very beginning, I knew that it needed to be amplified. I knew that it needed to have a kind of augmented instrumentation. So for example, the pianist also plays a synthesizer. The wind players also play junk metal and percussion. Everyone in the ensemble is using their voice in some way. And the goal, which I think we've achieved, is to make it sound kind of cinematic in a certain way in terms of it's kind of a huge sonic experience, but only with these 7 players. And there are pre-recorded tracks that will come on and come off as triggered from the keyboardist samples. Yeah. Anything else you want to? Yes. So Garth McAlevey is our sound designer, who is a dear friend and at this point quite a long time collaborator, who we met actually at the very first workshop of Soldier Songs at Le Poisson Rouge, where he had just started, and he was basically just like,
As a kid.
he was just, yeah, kind of going to get coffee for the guy in the booth or something. And I mean, he was really, had just started out, had just come to New York. And I remember we saw him and he was so on top of things and was so responsible and responsive. And we said, that guy, he's great. And the next thing we know, he's, you know, basically running that venue, is now kind of running the sound aspects of National Sawdust. And he and I have worked together very closely on the sound design of this piece and also in my piece, Dog Days. And so he is the one who is, I think of him as another kind of eighth member of the ensemble who is making the ensemble, or ninth with our conductor, who's really making the sound world come to life. Because I've definitely seen productions where it hasn't been Garth and it hasn't quite had the scale that I think it needs.
So a couple people who aren't here tonight are the stage director, Ashley Tata, who's done all the staging of the work, and also Bill Morrison, who is no relation to me, but is a very, well, he's a famous avant-garde filmmaker. He had a retrospective at the Modern Museum in New York, and he's done stuff all over. And so when David and I wanted to conceive of a touring production for this piece, we thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get Bill to do film for this? And Bill's work, his hallmark and sort of his, I don't know, calling card, if you will, is he uses found footage from decades and decades ago and brings it together, treats it, changes it, and uses it to become his own thing. And so this production is really a dialogue between David's music and the film that Bill has created, which runs for the entire piece. Much of the staging of the opera is behind what's called a scrim, which is a soft good, right? Like a curtain, if you will. Sort of a see-through curtain that when you put light onto it, you can see the image on the front of it, and you can also see what's behind it. And in this case, what's behind it is the performer and the band. So you'll be seeing the performer sort of in the center, David Adamore, in the center of the film image up on a platform, a scaffolding platform, and underneath the platform you'll be seeing the band. So they're not in a pit, they're part of the visual aesthetic of the show. And the pieces, as Annie was saying, this is not a linear narrative opera. You don't need to be wondering, what is the story I need to be following? It's really not about that. It's originally created as a song cycle, and we like to call it opera through song cycle. And so a song cycle is, you know, maybe, well, in this case, 12 pieces, 12 songs that make a whole. But they don't necessarily tell a story that you can narrate throughout, okay? So you're gonna be looking at snapshots of what it was to play war games as a child, to play video games, what it was to enlist in war, what it is to be out of war and struggling with PTSD, what it is to be a father receiving the information that your child has been killed in war. So take each piece on its own little journey, and the film is illuminating that piece. And some of it feels more abstract, and some of it feels more literal. And you can create that story for yourselves as you go along in that dialogue between the film and the music.
And I would just, if I can add to that, I mean, my goal is for you to sort of collect all of this as an audience member and take it with you, and to think about it for the days, weeks, months, years after you see it. And I think that's when the piece really kind of, in a way, kind of comes to life in your memory and in your reflection. That sort of, for me, is the kind of way in which it engages socially, I think, with the audiences through that reflection.
And also, I think, you know, if you're bringing friends and family to the piece that are veterans, definitely let them know, you know, that there may be moments that are tough. The veterans that have come to see this piece have been so taken by it, so moved by it. We've engaged a variety of different veteran communities around the country as we've done this piece, and all of them really say the same thing, which is that it's such an important work for them to see, and every bit as much of an important work for their family to see, because they often, as is the theme of this piece, can't talk about it. So bringing their family to see this, they can share their experience without having to actually tell them. And so it's been really, I don't know, it's been very moving to watch the veteran community come to this piece and to say, yeah, you know, it was tough, but I'm so glad that I was here, and it offered some, you know, I mean, we don't want to overstate it, but some sort of cathartic moment for them as they wrestle with coming back from war.
And so at Beth and David's suggestion, following each performance, we will be hosting a talk-back session. They will be a part of that, moderated by Nathan, and we also have a PTSD specialist who will be part of that conversation to talk about the piece. So we'll move on to part 3 of the piece, called Elder, and the description is, here the stories diverge. Veterans reflect on their experiences in combat or discuss the challenges of reintegration into civilian life. One man reflects on the futility of an endless war. Another confronts the bereavement team sent to notify him of his son's death in combat. The opera concludes with reported interviews, the composer's family and friends, the soldiers who inspired this work, as our soldier opens his mouth to tell his story. So we're going to play an excerpt, but before we get to Two Marines, actually the second piece in this final part, I just want to point out, what year again did you write this opera, David?
Between 2004 and 2006.
Okay, 2004, 2006. The second piece in this final part is called Every Town Has a Wall. The text being, they say that good fences make good neighbors. I guess you could say the same about strong walls. In medieval days, every town had a wall for keeping certain people out and protecting those inside. So I just want to point out that the piece becomes more and more timely and
yeah,
conversation-provoking as time goes on.
Yes.
And we'll leave it there.
And also, like, I remember like when we did this with LA Opera, and you know, opera program's pretty far out, as you said. And his question to me was, do you think this piece is still going to be relevant in a few years? And we just did it this last fall. And my answer to him was, unfortunately and sort of very sadly, I think this piece is going to always be relevant.
Well, and I think, yeah, it's not even a matter of I think war has been a part of civilization forever. So, and going back to the Greeks, you have stories that are talking about the difficulty of reintegrating into society. I mean, this is not a new story in a way. It just happens to be told in this moment. You know?
So the excerpt you're going to hear is from Two Marines, and so this photograph, this snapshot, depicts a veteran, correct, who sees two Marines approaching his door?
It's a father, yeah. So this is not from an interview actually. This is a historic. This is a news story. A man named Carlos Arredondo, who lived in Florida at the time, had lost. This tells the story when he lost his second son.
Oh no.
His first son, I believe, had already died, and this was his second son, and he, just lost control and sort of saw the notification team went out the back door, grabbed a can of gasoline, got into their van, and lit himself on fire in the van. And the Marines who were there got him out, and he's fine. I mean, he's recovered, and he was burned, but there was something about that just made explicit, in a way, the horror of that moment and the impossibility of kind of expressing it. So,
Well, you hear him say, I know, like I've heard this all before. I had presumed that was because he had been a member of the military, but it's actually because this is his second son that died in combat. Oh boy, let's play it, Nate. That's two Marines from Soldier Songs.
We have 15 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you guys a couple questions, and especially, talking to Beth about kind of the producing imperative. What keeps you going, being absolutely at the forefront of producing new works? Why are pieces like this important, and why are they being done so much more frequently now than they were 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, when I started my company 13 years ago, there was hardly anybody doing new work, and now most companies are doing at least some, and some are doing quite a lot, actually, of new work. I think it's the evolution of the art form, quite honestly. I think that, prior to the 20th century, opera was something that people really loved and enjoyed and came out for. And that there's something about the atonality and difficulty of the 20th century new music that alienated audiences. And over time, over decades, I think the music going public decided that they didn't like new music.
Right.
And that's been a very, very hard wall to chip away at. But entering into the 21st century, and composers like David and many, many other wonderful young composers who are writing, they're writing melody, and they're writing harmony, and they're creating a very different kind of musical experience than what was new music of the 20th century. So I think what you all can do as ambassadors is, for all of your friends that say, oh, I don't like new opera, or I don't like new music, say, give it a shot, keep an open mind. This isn't the music of the 20th century, this is something new. Come out, take a listen, hear the influences of musical theater, hear the influences of rock and roll, hear a different kind of a language, and hear a story that has something to do with us today, and hear it in our language. That's not to put down the operatic canon at all. The history of this art form is triumphant, with Mozart, with Puccini, with Verdi, all of these incredible composers. And that, I hope that those works are done from now till the end of time. But our mark, what we can do, what we can bring, is a new canon, which is an American canon with American stories in our language, in our musical language. And isn't that exciting? And isn't that something that people can rally around and get behind? And God bless that you guys have the most incredible team running Austin Opera with Annie and Nate. They're two of the bright, shining lights in the opera industry. And I know, when you're sitting here in the city, all you know is them. But let me tell you, the buzz in the community is Austin Opera is one to watch. And you've got an amazing team here.
Well, thanks, Beth. As we talk about this kind of legacy we can have in American opera, that certainly doesn't come for free, as you well know. And so I do need to introduce two couples who are with us tonight, who are the founding underwriters of Opera ATX. And I came to them with this idea. It seemed a little crazy, but they got really excited about it and were willing to make really significant investments in it before it even came to the stage. So if you could join me in thanking Patrick and Judy Cantillo, who are back there. And the wonderful Ken and Paula Smith. Unless you have some parting words, we can probably take just a few questions. Do you want to go to questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Only easy ones.
For questions about the piece at Austin Opera.
How do you produce when you don't have the finances to produce?
That's a great question. Well, things have changed dramatically from the 13 years ago when I started my company. So we're now a $2.5 million company. We've got 8 full-time staff members. We get a lot of grants. We get a lot of individual donors. We have a great board. So over the 13 years, I've built a company that is a nonprofit production company. We don't have a theater. We're itinerant, so we go wherever the piece needs us to go. And we tour around the world. So our home is Brooklyn and Los Angeles. And then we're touring all over. This year we're in Australia 3 times, we're in Hong Kong 3 times, we're in San Francisco right now with a show that's happening. We're kind of all over. We're really trying to identify a new way of bringing this work to the world. And fortunately we have great supporters, which honestly, like, I hats off to you for believing in an idea as it's being hatched. I know what that's like, and the support of people who have the vision is everything. So you find those people, and you find your family, and that's the most important thing.
However, do not underestimate the things that she has willed into being really through sheer will. True. I mean, Beth built every brick of this. She does not, there is not, you know, an anonymous wealthy patron sitting on high making all of this possible. And often when I'm thinking, like, how am I going to make this project possible? I'll think about Beth, and I'll think, what would Beth Morrison do? She'd put on a black dress and some combat boots, and she would make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, people, you know, I've never started a project where I had all the money raised before I started it. Generally, I don't have any of the money raised before I started. And people always ask me, oh, isn't that scary? Isn't that, like, how do you do that? Like, what happened? I'm just like, if I waited, I wouldn't have done anything. Literally nothing. You just have to start and hope for the best and make all of the connections you can make to the people that you think are the right people for that particular work, for that particular composer. And it's fun, you know. Of course it's stressful. You know, I've had a lot of sleepless nights, but I wouldn't trade my life for anything.
Did you ever meet or know Zero Mostel?
No, I'm sorry to say.
I can just sort of add to what Beth said, from the perspective of a composer, to have a producer who is so absolutely, just has absolute faith in what you're doing, even when nothing exists. We're developing a piece now called Artaud in the Black Lodge that literally started over a conversation 7 years ago. Until December, I really had no idea what it was. But Beth was still committed to it and said, well, we'll figure it out. We'll, you know, we'll do what we need to do. And now it's sort of coming into light. And that's not typical. One might say that's not normal. And so, and it's a real blessing for me to have someone in my both professional and personal life who just believes in what I'm doing. It's a hard thing, you know, to kind of put yourself out there in your music, and so I definitely can say I wouldn't be writing opera without Beth.
And I would say as well, you know, Nathan and I both come from companies that commissioned and produced a lot of new work. The best new works that come to the forefront are a result of a producer or a company believing in an individual artist. And helping them develop whatever it is that they are passionate about, what is a story that they need to tell. And that's how you get outstanding pieces of opera, right? We're not going to go to David and say, I think you should write an opera about like Matthew McConaughey, you know.
But a lot of companies do that, like the two of you, which is why I'm saying again, like why the lights are on Austin Opera and what's going to happen here. Because of you two and the companies you have come from, which are artist-led companies, and there are a lot of companies who will say, I want you to write an opera about, I don't know, some movie that you're going to adapt or whatever, as opposed to letting the composer, the director come to you and say, I have this idea. And you know, what Dave was saying about this project that has been going on for 7 years, you know, the greatest, the greatest moments of my life are those conversations, really. Like those very beginning conversations. And it happened with Dog Days too, David's sort of first full-length opera. And he would call me and he said, so I think the last 20 minutes of the piece doesn't have any singing. Do you think that's okay? The last 20 minutes of the piece, well, what I said to him was, if that's what you think and that's what you hear, then yes, of course it's okay, write it. And the last 20 minutes of the piece are the groundbreaking parts of that piece.
Yeah. What are the duties of a producer?
That's a great question. So, I mean, you're looking at two producers here, right? What we do is we work with the artists. Creative producing means working very closely with the artists, developing a creative team, the director, the designers coming together, finding the shared vision, and then it's logistical, you know, a lot of logistical work, which in my company, my team does now, which is really how do we build that vision for the stage? How do we take what the scenic designer wants to do and turn it into a scenic design? It's raising all the money. It's doing, you know, for a producer like me, it's doing a lot of pitching. So I'm pitching presenters, people who will take the work for money, but for the gigs for the show. So we tour our work all around the world, so I'm a sales representative for the projects, if you will. And that's how our model works. Yeah, it's so many things. And you've got two great producers right here in Austin.
Who also really believe in you as a producer.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Is there anything you can tell us about what you're working on with the Met?
Ooh, yes. We'd have to kill you.
Yeah, not really. Sorry, no, it's going to be amazing. That's all I can say right now.
It's an original piece.
Thanks. We can take one more question for these two, and Melissa has selected the individual. Patrick, you had a question? No, you did, sir.
You're probably aware there's a wonderful local program, Songwriting with Soldiers, where the local songwriter goes out, camps out with the soldiers. Very therapeutic for all. I can so easily imagine a connection with the traumatized soldiers. And in your production, is there any official connection with Veterans Groups inside?
There is with Austin Opera. We've been working with Songwriting with Soldiers, a number of other veterans groups here.
I'm just curious, how many people in the audience are either veterans or are connected by family or friends to veterans or active? Right? Yeah. Great. Well, we look forward to welcoming you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming tonight, folks, and we'll see you this weekend.